Vacations are meant to be a well-deserved escape, right? Well, I certainly needed one more than ever. Life had been throwing me punches like a heavyweight boxer, leaving me breathless and reeling. The divorce papers lingered on my kitchen counter, unsigned and heavy with unspoken words, while the recent company restructuring had me hanging on to my job by the tips of my fingers, uncertain of what tomorrow might bring. So, I made a decision. I would head to Hawaii. I envisioned sun-soaked beaches, soft sand beneath my toes, and a reprieve from the relentless barrage of emails. Just me, trying to piece my shattered self back together on a far-off shore where nobody recognized me. Finding the perfect Airbnb turned out to be an adventure in itself. Most places were either exorbitantly priced tourist traps, designed to extract every last penny from unsuspecting travelers, or they were dismal shacks pretending to be charming rustic retreats. After what felt like an endless search, I stumbled upon a gem. A 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom beachfront house, available for an astonishingly low rate of just $100 a night. The listing boasted stunning professional photos showcasing gleaming hardwood floors, a spacious open-concept living room, and windows that promised breathtaking ocean views. While the reviews were limited, they were overwhelmingly positive, albeit none were particularly recent. I couldn't resist. It felt like the universe was finally throwing me a bone. The booking process was surprisingly seamless. There was no tedious back and forth with the host, just an immediate confirmation and a set of check-in instructions. In hindsight, I should have sensed that something was amiss, but when desperation grips you, it tends to dull your instincts. I boarded my flight out of O'Hare on a Wednesday morning, the excitement of my impending getaway battling with the anxiety of the journey ahead. The plane ride seemed to stretch on indefinitely, punctuated by the wails of crying babies, a fellow passenger who wouldn't stop coughing, and turbulence that had me gripping the armrest like it was a lifeline. By the time we finally touched down in what felt like paradise, I was ready to embrace whatever awaited me, hoping that this trip would be the balm my weary soul so desperately craved. I felt like I was running on fumes, fueled solely by the bitter taste of airport coffee and the tantalizing promise of tranquility that awaited me. When I arrived at the rental car agency, they handed me the keys to a well-worn Honda Civic that had clearly seen better days. The air conditioning wheezed more than it cooled, and there was an unsettling clicking noise emanating from the engine that made my heart race. But it was functional, and at that moment, functionality was all I needed. As I set off towards the Airbnb, the drive began like any typical tourist experience. Beaches lined with sunbathers, palm trees swaying in the gentle breeze, and visitors sporting sunburns as they snapped selfies to capture their vacation moments. However, as I followed the GPS deeper into the island, the scenery began to shift dramatically. The roads narrowed, the smooth pavement giving way to patches of gravel, and the tropical foliage thickened, creating a lush green tunnel that seemed to envelop my little car. Suddenly, the GPS signal flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, I feared I had lost my way completely. Just as panic began to set in, the voice returned, guiding me down a winding path that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in years. "You have arrived at your destination," the GPS announced, and I reluctantly killed the engine. As I stepped out of the car, the house loomed before me, and an instinctive twist in my gut warned me that something was amiss. Don't get me wrong, the place looked just like the photos. It was a charming beach house with weathered blue siding, crisp white trim, and a wraparound porch that surely offered breathtaking views of the sunset. Yet, despite its picturesque appearance, an unsettling feeling gnawed at me. The windows seemed to gaze back at me, as if they were eyes observing my every move, and the wind rustled through the surrounding palms, creating whispers that almost sounded like words. I shook off the creeping unease as best I could and grabbed my bags from the trunk, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. The key was supposed to be hidden under a potted plant by the door, cleverly disguised as one of those fake rocks that people often use to hide spare keys. I approached the entrance, my heart pounding, hoping that the key would be waiting for me as promised, and that the whispers of the wind were merely figments of my imagination. I stood there for a moment, feeling like a fool, but I shook off the unease and focused on the task at hand. Finding the key was surprisingly easy. The rock felt oddly warm to the touch, warmer than it should have been, even under the Hawaiian sun. When I inserted the key and turned it, the lock clicked open, the sound echoing in the strange silence that surrounded me. I suddenly realized, aren't tropical islands supposed to be alive with the sounds of chirping birds? As I pushed the door open, it creaked ominously, reminiscent of a scene straight out of a horror movie. The dim interior was revealed, filled with the scent of sea salt, mixed with something older and mustier that I couldn't quite identify. It was as if the house itself held secrets that were waiting to be uncovered. I fumbled for the light switch, and the yellowed bulbs flickered to life, casting long shadows that danced across the hardwood floors. I dropped my bags in what appeared to be the master bedroom. It boasted a king-sized bed, an ensuite bathroom, and those much-promised ocean views through windows that desperately needed a good cleaning. The bedsheets were crisp and white, tucked in with hospital corners so tight they could have passed for a display in a showroom. Yet, something about their pristine whiteness felt off in this otherwise lived-in space. Exhausted from my journey, I decided to take a quick walk through before unpacking. The house had a cozy charm, with a fireplace that, while lovely, seemed oddly out of place in a Hawaiian setting. The kitchen featured granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked like they belonged in a gourmet cooking show, while the dining room had a table set for 6, despite the fact that I couldn't imagine 6 people fitting comfortably in this space. My throat felt dry from the travel, so I made my way to the kitchen in search of water. The fridge hummed quietly, almost too quietly, as if it were trying not to draw attention to itself. When I opened the door, the light flickered twice before settling into a steady glow. Inside, it was mostly empty, save for a few condiments and a bottle of white wine with no label. That's when I noticed it. An envelope, yellowed with age, taped to the inside of the fridge door. The edges were stained with something dark that I convinced myself was merely water damage. My name, Steve, was written on it in elegant cursive, the kind of handwriting that you don't see anymore. Something that felt both personal and unsettling, as if the house had been waiting for me all along. I stared at the envelope for what felt like an eternity, my hand hovering near it, but not quite touching. In my line of work as an insurance adjuster, unexpected letters usually meant bad news. But this was supposed to be my vacation, my escape from reality. I wrestled with my curiosity until it finally overwhelmed my hesitation. I peeled the envelope from the door, noting how the paper felt oddly thick, almost leathery beneath my fingertips. Inside was a folded piece of paper that looked newer than the envelope, though not by much. As I unfolded it, the paper crackled loudly in the quiet house, an unnatural sound that made me wince. The handwriting matched that on the envelope, precise, almost mechanical in its perfection. "Hello, Steve," it began, and a cold shiver slithered down my spine. How long had this envelope been waiting for me? The letter continued, "Thank you for choosing to stay at this Airbnb for the week. I hope your stay is a good one, but first, you must read the rules." I felt a knot form in my stomach as I read on. Rule 1. We do not have a maid. If a tall woman in a maroon dress knocks on the front door, claiming to be the maid, do not open the door. Rule 1AA. If the woman returns the next day, hide. preferably in a room with a lock. Rule 2. Never leave open food in the fridge for more than 2 days. Rule 3. If you wake up in the middle of the night and see a man in your kitchen, don't freak out. He will be gone by morning. Rule 4. Don't go outside after the sun goes down. Rule 5. If you see a little kid in the pool, call the number on the fridge and inform them. They will send someone to handle it. Rule 6. If you walk up the stairs and see a little girl holding a teddy bear, go into the first door on your left, grab a toy from the box, and place it in front of the girl. Then go downstairs for 15 minutes. It will be safe afterward. Rule 6. A. If the girl doesn't leave, run. Rule 7. Never go into the attic, even if you hear noises. The note ended with a neat signature. Sincerely, the owner. I read it 3 times, my heart rate picking up with each pass. This had to be a joke, right? Some local's idea of messing with tourists, or maybe the owner's quirky way of making stays memorable. But if it was meant to be funny, the punchline was lost on me. I could feel the regret settling in my stomach like a lead weight. The rational part of my brain, the part that dealt with insurance claims and mortgage payments, tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a liability thing, some weird way of warning about local wildlife or trespassers. But another part of my brain, a more primitive part that remembered being afraid of the dark, whispered that something else was going on here. I pulled out my phone to call the owner, to demand an explanation, or maybe just cancel my stay altogether. No signal, of course. I moved around the house, holding my phone up like some kind of digital divining rod, searching for even one bar of reception. Nothing. Just then, the doorbell rang. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house, making me jump so hard I dropped my phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor, the screen lighting up with the no service message that seemed to mock me now. Another ring, more insistent this time. I approached the front door cautiously, my feet silent on the old floorboards, which was strange because they'd creaked under my weight earlier. The peephole was one of those old-fashioned brass ones, the kind that distorts everything into a fisheye view of reality. Through it, I saw her. A tall woman in a maroon dress, exactly as the rules had described. Her face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat that looked like something from another era. She stood perfectly still, hands clasped in front of her, waiting. Then she knocked again. 3 sharp raps that seemed to reverberate through my bones. "Hello, sir," she called out, her voice pleasant and professional, like a flight attendant. "I'm the maid. I'm here to clean the house." Rule number 1 echoed in my mind. Do not open the door. "There must be some mistake," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wasn't told about any maid service." She didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched out, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the distant crash of waves that suddenly seemed very far away. "Sir," she said finally, her voice different now, lower, rougher, like something trying to remember how to sound human. "I need to clean. The house needs cleaning. Let me in." The knocking resumed, but it wasn't the polite tapping from before. This was a pounding, relentless and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The door shuddered in its frame with each impact, and I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the rug. I fell hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. The pounding continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I lay there on the floor, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no waves, not even the hum of the refrigerator. Just nothing. After what felt like an eternity, I gathered the courage to look through the peephole again. The porch was empty. I spent the next hour pacing the house, double-checking every lock and window. My phone still showed no signal, and the house's Wi-Fi password from the welcome packet connected to nothing. I was effectively cut off from the outside world, trapped in this house with its strange rules and whatever had just pretended to be a maid. The logical thing would have been to leave, to get in that beat-up Civic and drive until I found civilization again. But something stopped me. Maybe pride, maybe curiosity, or perhaps something else. Something that had been waiting for me since I first saw that too good to be true listing. By late afternoon, the humidity had become unbearable. The house's air conditioning worked, but barely, pushing around warm air that seemed to cling to my skin. A swim started to sound good, too good to resist. Despite everything that had happened, the pool I'd seen from my bedroom window beckoned, promising relief from both the heat and my growing anxiety. I changed into swim trunks, grabbed a towel from the bathroom, noticed how it smelled faintly of mothballs, and headed out back. The pool was smaller than it had looked from above, kidney-shaped and surrounded by concrete that had seen better days. The water was clear, though, invitingly blue in the late afternoon sun. I dipped a toe in, perfect temperature. Before long, I was swimming laps, trying to wash away the memory of the woman in the maroon dress. The water felt good, normal, and for a few minutes I could almost pretend this was just a regular vacation. That's when I saw him. He appeared without sound or warning, a little boy, maybe 7 or 8, sitting cross-legged at the edge of the pool. He wore red swim trunks, and nothing else, his pale skin almost translucent in the sunlight. But it was his eyes that made my heart skip a beat. They were vacant, unfocused, like dusty marbles set into a doll's face. He stared at me, or through me, his head tilted at an angle that looked wrong on a human neck. I froze in the water, my feet finding the bottom of the pool. Rule number 5 screamed in my head. If you see a little kid in the pool, call the number on the fridge. The boy's head tilted further than it should have been able to go, until his ear nearly touched his shoulder. His lips moved, but no sound came out. I bolted from the pool, water cascading off me as I ran for the house. I didn't bother with the towel, leaving wet footprints across the hardwood as I sprinted to the kitchen. The phone number was there on a yellow sticky note, the ink slightly faded but still legible. My hands shook as I dialed on the landline phone, wondering if it would even work. It did, connecting on the first ring. "Hello?" The voice was crisp, professional, as if they'd been waiting for my call. Yeah, hi," I stammered, water still dripping onto the floor. "My name is Steve. I'm at the AIRBNB. There's a kid by the pool." The silence that followed felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken knowledge. Then the voice returned, calm but commanding. "Listen carefully. Lock all the doors and windows. Do not, under any circumstances, look outside. Someone will be there shortly." The line went dead. I ran through the house, checking every lock, drawing every curtain as I passed the windows facing the pool. I fought the urge to look outside, but human nature is a powerful thing, and at the last window, I couldn't help myself. I lifted the corner of the curtain just slightly. The boy was still there, but he'd moved. He now stood at the edge of the pool, his back to the house. Water dripped from his body, forming a perfect circle around his feet. As if sensing my gaze, he began to turn. I dropped the curtain and backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. The doorbell rang. For a moment, panic seized me. Had the woman in maroon returned? But when I checked the peephole, I saw 2 men in black suits, their faces expressionless. They didn't wait for me to open the door. Instead, they produced a key and let themselves in. They moved with practiced efficiency, not speaking a word to me. One headed straight for the backyard, while the other stood guard at the door. I caught glimpses of equipment in their hands, things that looked military but somehow wrong, like technology from another time or place. I sat on the couch, my wet swim trunks soaking into the fabric, listening to sounds I couldn't identify coming from the backyard. Once, I heard what might have been a child's laugh, but it was cut off abruptly, replaced by a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. 2 hours passed before they returned inside. The one who had gone to the pool looked different somehow. His suit was dry but wrinkled in impossible ways, and a thin trickle of what looked like blood ran from his nose. "It's safe now," he said, his voice flat and mechanical. Without another word, they left, the door clicking shut behind them. I waited until their car pulled away before looking out the window. The pool was still there, still blue, still inviting, but the water was completely still, unnaturally so, as if it had been frozen solid despite the Hawaiian heat. After the pool incident, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching me. Every creak, every shadow, every reflection in the windows seemed loaded with meaning. The sun was starting to set, painting the walls in shades of orange and red that looked uncomfortably like dried blood. I needed to eat something, but the thought of cooking made my stomach turn. I hadn't brought any food in with me, and after the rules about the fridge, I wasn't sure I wanted to. Still, I had to check what supplies were available. Opening the kitchen cabinets revealed a strange assortment of items. Canned goods with labels so faded I couldn't read them. Boxes of crackers that looked new, but had expiration dates from 3 years ago, and a single box of cereal that rattled in a way cereal shouldn't. I closed the cabinets and decided hunger was better than whatever was in there. The sun had almost set now, and rule number 4 echoed in my head: don't go outside after dark. Through the kitchen window, I could see the last rays of sunlight disappearing behind the trees. The darkness that followed seemed thicker than normal, almost liquid in its density. My phone still showed no signal, but the screen displayed 8:47 p.m., hours to go before morning. I decided to distract myself with TV, but when I turned it on, all channels showed static except one. A local station playing what looked like old cartoons. But something was off about them. The characters' movements were too jerky, their voices pitched slightly wrong, and their eyes, those eyes, seemed to follow me around the room. I switched it off quickly. The house settled into night sounds, the typical creaks and groans of an old building, but also other noises I couldn't quite identify. Something that might have been footsteps in the attic. Rule 7. Never go into the attic, even if you hear noises. A sound like fingernails on glass came from somewhere upstairs, and occasionally, very faintly, what sounded like a child's laughter. I checked my watch. 9:23 p.m. The digital display flickered for a moment, showing what looked like strange symbols before returning to normal numbers. I decided to try sleeping. At least unconsciousness would make the time pass faster. Sleep didn't come easily. The bed was comfortable enough, but every time I started to drift off, some new sound would jerk me back to awareness. The waves crashing outside should have been soothing, but their rhythms seemed wrong somehow, as if they were hitting the shore in Morse code. When I finally did fall asleep, it was the kind of shallow, uneasy rest that leaves you more tired than before. I dreamed of the boy from the pool, but in the dream, his head kept turning, until it had spun completely around multiple times like a grotesque corkscrew. I jolted awake at exactly 3:33 a.m. The numbers glowed an angry red on the bedside clock. Something had woken me, some noise from downstairs. I lay there in the darkness, listening to my own heartbeat when I heard it, the distinct sound of someone moving around in the kitchen. Rule number 3. If you wake up in the middle of the night and see a man in your kitchen, don't freak out. He will be gone by morning. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in bed, to pull the covers over my head like a child and wait for dawn. But I had to know, had to see. I crept to the bedroom door, wincing at every tiny creak of the floorboards. The hallway was dark, but a faint light spilled up the stairs from the kitchen. Not electric light, but something softer, more organic, like bioluminescence. Step by careful step, I made my way down the stairs, clinging to the wall to avoid the worst of the creaks. The glow got stronger as I approached the kitchen, casting everything in a pale, sickly blue. And there he was. He stood at the counter, his back to me, dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned suit. He was tall, too tall, his head nearly brushing the ceiling and unnaturally thin. His movements were wrong, jerky, like a marionette, as he appeared to be preparing something on the counter. "Don't freak out. He'll be gone by morning," I told myself. I started to back away slowly, but I must have made some small noise because he stopped moving. Just stopped, completely still, like a photograph. Then, very slowly, his head began to turn. I ran back up the stairs, taking them two at a time, not caring about the noise now. I slammed the bedroom door and dove under the covers, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. I lay there shaking, straining to hear any sound of footsteps following me. Nothing came. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows. I went downstairs cautiously, my throat dry, desperately needing water. The kitchen was empty, everything exactly as it had been the day before. Except on the counter was a single teacup filled with something dark that steamed gently in the morning light. Next to it was a note in that same perfect handwriting. "You weren't supposed to look." I spent the morning in a daze, the teacup on the counter, a constant reminder that this wasn't just my imagination running wild. I poured its contents down the drain, watching the liquid leave an iridescent film that slowly crawled back up the drain pipe before disappearing. My phone still showed no signal, but the time kept changing in strange ways, sometimes jumping forward hours, sometimes backward, sometimes displaying impossible numbers, like 2561. I'd given up on it as a reliable way to track time. The sun moved across the sky too quickly, or maybe my perception of time was warped by fear and lack of sleep. Either way, evening approached far sooner than it should have. I needed to get supplies, food, water, maybe a weapon, but Rule 4 echoed in my mind. Don't go outside after dark, and darkness was coming fast. I decided to do one last check of the house before sunset, looking for anything I might have missed that could help me understand what was happening. That's when I made my fatal mistake. I went upstairs. She was there, standing at the end of the hallway. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, with pigtails that hung at slightly different lengths. She clutched a teddy bear that looked wrong somehow, its proportions off, its button eyes reflecting light that didn't exist. But it was her eyes that froze me in place. Dark, bottomless pits that seemed to swallow the light around them. Rule 6 kicked in through my panic. If you walk up the stairs and see a little girl holding a teddy bear, go into the first door on your left. Grab a toy from the box. Place it in front of the girl, then go downstairs for 15 minutes. The first door on the left. I turned slowly, keeping the girl in my peripheral vision. The door was there, though I could have sworn this hallway had been differently arranged before. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. The room beyond was small, barely larger than a closet, and completely empty except for a cardboard box in the center. The box looked old, water-stained, and soft at the corners. Inside were toys, dozens of them, all looking decades old and slightly wrong. A doll with too many fingers, a toy car with windows that seemed to show actual darkness inside, a wooden train that felt warm to the touch, like it had a fever. I grabbed the first thing my hand touched, a small boat made of what felt like bone rather than wood. Rule 6 hadn't specified what kind of toy to use, and I wasn't about to stay long enough to be picky. The girl hadn't moved when I came out, but her head had turned to follow me, her neck bent at an impossible angle. I placed the bone boat at her feet, trying not to look directly at her face, then backed away toward the stairs. "Run! Run! Run!" my instincts screamed, but I forced myself to walk down the stairs into the living room. I collapsed onto the couch, my heart hammering in my chest, and looked at my watch. 15 minutes. I just had to wait 15 minutes. The seconds crawled by. The house had gone completely silent. No creaks, no waves, not even the hum of the refrigerator. Just the sound of my own breathing and the tick-tick-tick of my watch, which seemed to be slowing down. 14 minutes. The silence grew heavier, pressing against my eardrums. 13 minutes. Was that humming coming from upstairs? 12 minutes. The light in the room seemed to be dimming, though the sun shouldn't have set yet. 10 minutes. The humming had definitely gotten louder, and now it had a melody, a twisted version of a lullaby I almost recognized. 8 minutes. The temperature was dropping. I could see my breath. 5 minutes. The humming stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of something dragging across the floor upstairs. 3 minutes. Footsteps, small, light footsteps coming down the stairs. 2 minutes. They stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I kept my eyes fixed on my watch. 1 minute. Something was breathing behind me. Time's up. I looked up from my watch. She was still there. Rule 6A. If the girl doesn't leave, run. I bolted for the front door, my fingers fumbling with the locks. Behind me, the girl made a sound. Not a child's laugh, but something older. Something that sounded like metal scraping against bone. The door finally opened, and I burst out onto the porch, only to realize with horror that the sun had already gone down. The darkness enveloped me like a shroud, thick and suffocating. I could feel it pressing against my skin, whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. I turned to run, but the air felt heavy, as if the night itself was trying to hold me back. I sprinted down the path, my heart racing, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The trees loomed around me, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers, reaching out to snatch me from the safety of the light. I could hear the faint sound of laughter behind me, a chilling reminder that I was not alone. The girl's laughter, now distorted and echoing, seemed to follow me, wrapping around me like a noose. I stumbled, my foot catching on a root, and I fell to the ground, the impact jarring my senses. I scrambled to my feet, glancing back toward the house. The windows glowed with an unnatural light, shadows dancing within, as if the house itself was alive, watching, waiting for my return. Panic surged through me, and I took off again, pushing through the underbrush, branches clawing at my skin. I had to get to the road, to the safety of other people, to the world beyond this nightmare. But the darkness was relentless, swallowing the path ahead, making it impossible to see where I was going. Just as I thought I might break free, I heard it, a soft, almost melodic voice calling my name. Steve. It was sweet, inviting, but laced with something sinister. I shook my head, trying to block it out, but the sound wrapped around me, pulling me back toward the house. Steve, come play with us. The voice was closer now, and I could feel the chill of its breath on my neck. I turned, heart pounding, and saw the little girl standing just a few feet away, her eyes dark and endless, the teddy bear clutched tightly in her arms. Please don't, I begged, backing away. I just want to leave. But she only smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that split her face. You can't leave, Steve. You're part of the game now. Before I could react, she lunged at me, and I turned to run again, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear her footsteps behind me, light and quick, like a predator closing in on its prey. I burst through the trees and onto the road, the moonlight illuminating my path. But as I ran, I realized the road was empty, desolate. No cars, no signs of life, just me and the oppressive darkness that seemed to stretch on forever. I could feel the weight of the house behind me, its presence looming, as if it were a living entity, hungry for my return. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like lead. But the darkness was relentless. I could hear the laughter now, echoing in the night, a chorus of voices that filled the air with dread. "Come back, Steve! Come play with us!" Just when I thought I couldn't run any longer, I spotted headlights in the distance. Hope surged within me, and I sprinted toward them, waving my arms frantically. The car approached, and I could see the silhouette of the driver, a figure that seemed to glow against the darkness. But as the car drew closer, the headlights flickered, and the figure inside twisted, morphing into something grotesque. The laughter grew louder, surrounding me, drowning out my screams. I stumbled back, realizing too late that the road was just another trap, another part of the game. The car vanished, swallowed by the night, and I was left standing alone, the laughter echoing in my ears. I turned to run back toward the house, but it was gone, replaced by an endless expanse of darkness. I was lost, trapped in a nightmare with no escape, the rules of the game echoing in my mind.